Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on No Way Jose YouTube channel, all major auto podcasters, and Odyssey as well. Today, my guest is Matthew Gilman. We're continuing our series on the Duncan Lemp whole ordeal. A little bit of deep dive. He's an author writing a book. I believe it may already be released now. If not, it's about to be. I'll ask him in a minute. I forget exactly when the release date is. I definitely need to order that soon. But I do want to remind you guys, I am back doing the paywall thing. I got caught up. It's the 1st of November. If you're watching now, you're catching the live stream. If not, it'll get released roughly a week or so later. And if you want to have access to it in the meantime, you got to be a patron at patreon.com. Just No Way Jose 2020. The lowest level is $2. I'll give you access to those episodes. There's differing levels. There's $5 level, $10 level, $20 level. Also, you can just give whatever amount you want if you want to go above or somewhere in between there. The highest level is $20. That's a sponsor level, and I'm Mikkel Thorpe of the Expat Money Show. If you want to get the hell out of Dodge, if you want to go to a different country, he's your guy. He has a podcast. He also does this as a business. So if you just want to kind of dip your toes in, you can go to the podcast, check that out. If you want to actually really get serious about it, you can go check out his business. I also have Jeremy Rhymes. He's an Etsy store or at etsy.com/shop/raising liberty. A lot of Liberty merch. Go check him out at Jeremy Rhymes on Twitter. And I also have a new sponsor. I believe I announced him on the last one, Toad, who have actually been doing a Democracy of the God that failed live reading series lately. He's also my co-host on Tower Power Hour, which is more my comedy podcast. If you're someone who doesn't like offensive jokes, probably don't watch it, but it's a more kind of Legion of Skanks style, I guess you could say is the best way to put it. And if you check out that show, if it's something that interests you, I'm a co-host, he's a co-host. We got a handful of other guys as well. Also, another co-host, TopLobsta. Go check out his merch at toplobsta.com. Use that checkout for 10% off. He's got my merch. He's got Tower Power merch. He's got a bunch of other different shows merch. He also has stuff that's not show related. So definitely highly suggest checking him out. With that, let's go ahead and get Matthew in here. Hey, what's up, man?
Oh, not much.
Hey, when's that book releasing? Is it released already, or is it? I think you had said it was going to be. Or I'll let you answer. I'm not entirely sure because I do want to get that ordered.
That was yesterday.
Yesterday. Okay.
Yesterday,
Cool.
yep. Print
All right.
and ebook format are
All right.
available.
Cool. You'll have to send me the link, and I can start putting them in the video description so people can just look in the video descriptions here, video or podcast. If you're doing the audio version, just check the podcast description and so that way people can have a quick link to that we can get it. So I've already read it through. I highly suggest it. I think it's a good primer for people. Let's go ahead and get into this. I do want to warn people, this is not going to be all explicitly Duncan Lemp stuff. We're going to be kind of jumping off of themes in the Duncan Lemp stuff. So obviously a big aspect of Duncan and why this may have occurred in the first place is the whole militia aspect. And I kind of wanted to form, just like the book is kind of written for someone who's just kind of, coming across the Duncan Lemp story. I also kind of wanted to fashion the series in a similar sense. So I kind of wanted to go into militias a little bit and the different militias he's associated with and give people, kind of a little bit of context on what's going on here. And why would the powers that be not like us to exercise our Second Amendment rights or First Amendment rights to congregate or associate or whatever the hell the First Amendment is. I forget the specifics of how it's worded, but so let's go ahead and get into it. I guess let's start off with what kind of vaguely militia groups was Duncan Lemp even associated with in the first place?
So Duncan was he called himself an active member of the 3%ers. That was one of the groups that he was involved in. He was also affiliated with the Boogaloo Boys, and they kind of came into notoriety around 2020, and it was a very confusing situation with the media because after Duncan was killed, you saw Boogaloo showing up at BLM rallies and protests, and they were supporting BLM. But as we know, the militia movement, regardless of what organization it is, they're all of them are labeled white supremacist groups. And yet here they are saying like, yeah, we support what they're saying about Breonna Taylor and all this other bull crap that's going on, and we don't like cops shooting anybody. And a lot of what they were trying to do was just making sure that their presence was known, and having a group of armed individuals who also train with their weapons being present at these protests. Cops, when they do show up, they tend to not get engaged or get involved, and or they just don't show up at all. So that was part of why the Boogaloo was there. And they how Duncan was also associated was on one of his I don't even think it was a carrier. I think it was just a bulletproof vest, but he had the flag, the Boogaloo flag, on one of them. That was part of the evidence that was collected after the shooting. And but he also had affiliations with different members. He made a website, boogaloo.net. It's obviously not on the internet anymore. But as for 3%ers, that seemed to be who he affiliated more with on an individual level. There's photos on Instagram and Facebook of him going to get-togethers on the weekends, and they would train together. It's a very interesting organization to begin with. It's very, very, even though it's on a national level, it's very localized in how they organized everything in the group, and that was based on the philosophy of Mike Vanderboe. He had a blog, the Sipsey Street Regulars, I believe it was called. It's still up. It's still available. All of his posts are still on there. Different essays that he wrote on the philosophy of the 3%ers, what they stood for, how they were supposed to organize, train, etc. And it was really, especially with the whole Whitmer thing going on here in northern Michigan, where I live. You'll see a guy with a t-shirt or a tattoo or something, and you have to ask yourself several questions, like, how new is that t-shirt, or is that tattoo real? And if you have a feeling that this guy really is a member of the group, he's not going to talk to you. Like that's just not an option right now with everything that happened with Gretchen Whitmer and the FBI and everything going on with that investigation. And I believe one of them was found guilty a couple days ago. That one of the trials ended, and
yeah, that must have been one of the state ones. I know there hasn't been much following on those ones. I mean, myself included. I'll be honest, I lost a little bit of interest once the federal cases kind of dropped off. But it's you can only devote so much time and effort to following these stories, Because I mean, anyone who's been watching my show knows I've covered that pretty decently. I mean, there's definitely people who've covered it better. He covered it. Did a decent job so far as my content goes. So I have a whole playlist for those interested. Go check it out, the Michigan. But yeah, no, that's a whole crazy story, and I guess we can probably even touch on that a little bit as we go on. But I want to start and kind of back it up. Militias kind of have a contentious history with the U.S. government, which anybody who's especially your generic, I guess red-blooded, conservative or I don't know, maybe someone who has an understanding of the original documents and stuff. And I'm not even a conservative; I'm more libertarian. Full honesty for anyone who's just showing up. I mean, although that's pretty obvious if you follow any of my content. But there definitely is like a contention. Anyone who knows how the militia is supposed to be is the idea is you're supposed to have a weaponized citizenry. It's supposed to be able to balance out with the whole idea is balance out against the government, kind of protect against despotism or whatever. And a lot of people don't seem to agree with that. And obviously, there's kind of even in the way it was originally intended by the founders, there's a contention between the government and the people, i.e., the militia. So I guess I wanted to kind of touch on that. Anyone who's followed my show for a long period of time, I've already covered a lot of stuff, but this is kind of a little bit back to basics. Let's kind of run through. We can go. I don't know if you want to go start before Ruby Ridge or start roughly around there, because it's like one event leads to the other.
Right.
Once you start going down this trail, and then you start with Ruby Ridge and you end with the FBI faking or making it appear like there is some concocted plan to steal to kidnap the Gretchen Whitmer or some shit. Like you can connect all these dots from one to the other. It's pretty wild once you start understanding the history. But I'll let you start where you want to go, and we'll kind of work up. And obviously we can kind of conversate as we go, because I definitely, especially OKC, there, I'm
Right.
sure that'll come up. That's one I'm a little bit more knowledgeable on, not as much as my guests I've had, but yeah. But I'll let you go.
Okay, so during the 70s and 80s, there was definitely an anti-government white supremacist. They were white supremacist movements. These were armed militias. They would be involved in things like bank robberies, where they were trying to finance their war against the government. You ended up with books like the Turner Diaries being written around this time. And there was one specific group called the Order, and they were trying to wage war against the federal government, unsuccessfully, obviously. But that kind of died off along with the Cold War. But then you ended up having Ruby Ridge with the Randy Weaver and his family, and this was where the feds were trying to infiltrate white supremacist groups in Idaho, which most of the United States are just kind of like, potatoes. Like nobody's really thinking of Idaho as like this haven, this Afghanistan of like white supremacist neo-Nazi movements. And so they're trying to get Randy Weaver to be a informant for them and get into these groups that he, as a neighbor, he was going to them. He was trying to get to know the people that he was living around. Some people say he was a white supremacist. Others say that he was just, trying to fit in with the place that he moved into.
Real quick, I do want to clarify. I mean, maybe it's just my libertarianism shining through, but the whole are they white supremacists or not? It's a little bit of a red herring for me, because it's like, okay, what are they doing? Are they like trying to wage a race war? Like, because if not, if they're just a group of guys that happen to not like black people and they're not hurting anyone, and they're just like, we want to keep the federal government from encroaching on our land or from taking our guns or whatever. It's like, okay, well, I don't like some of their ideas, but they're not hurting anyone, so who cares? And this is a common through line with all these militias. It's always painted as white supremacists, which ironically, a lot of the white supremacist organizations end up being extremely infiltrated by feds, if not mostly feds. I don't know if the Order was that case, but I know the ARA, which was like basically a later iteration of it in some sense, at least in spirit, was very much just. And that's tied into a lot of the OKC stuff, which we're going to do. That was very Fed related, but the feds abound in the militia stuff. But go on. I didn't want to throw you off, but I just want to point out the white supremacist thing is always the angle they point to, and it's kind of like, okay, but are they trying to wage a violent race war? Like, what is your point? If there's, especially like in Idaho, it's like, okay, yeah, it's a bunch of white dudes. Like it's Idaho in the 80s. I'm sure it was 98% white. So like, okay, like are they lynching black guys? Okay, all right, yeah. Now I see there's a problem. Like if not, like okay, you have some white guys who like guns who have some semi bad ideas. Like okay,
Right, yeah. Why even bother if they're unless they're mailing stuff to, I don't know, like the Unabomber. If they're doing stuff like that, yeah, I can understand why you're trying to figure out who these people are. But and the thing with Idaho is, and this wasn't in the book, but there's an author, James Wesley Rawls. He wrote a series of I can't remember the name of the series now. I believe it's the Patriot series. And there's this region of the United States. Idaho is like the center of it, but it's called the Great American Redoubt. And it encompasses parts of Washington State, Oregon, most of Idaho and parts of Montana. And it's just this region of these people. And I'm not necessarily saying that they're all militia, but it's like Christian, white, conservative. They have like their solid values, and they just try to keep that area how they want it, kind of like their own gated community in a way. But that came up with the James Wesley Rawls books, which brilliant guy. He's a vet. He's got his Patriot series, which some books are good, others are a bit of a mess, but he does some really great survivalist stuff. But when it came to back to Randy Weaver, there ended up being a siege on his property, and it was after his son was killed. There's still argument as to whether the Fed shot first or if the son shot first. As the story goes, the dog was barking, and one of the FBI agents shot the dog. The son said, "You shot my dog, you son of a bitch," and fired back. And next thing you know, there's a shootout going on. Randy Weaver's wife was killed during that. One of their neighbors who was helping on the property, he was hit. And I think it was 10 or 11 days go by before they finally convince him to surrender. And at the very end of it, the family ends up winning this lawsuit against the FBI, which doesn't bring the family back. It doesn't undo what happened. But anyways, there's a lot of anger about what happened with the Weaver family. And then a few years later, you have Waco. And that
real quick, I do want to back up on Ruby Ridge to provide a little bit of context, because I feel like it's kind of is important here for the larger context of the Duncan Lemp story. I know there might be a loose Fed involvement to some extent at some point. We may talk about that later. But with the Ruby Ridge one, I believe what they got him for was they got him to saw off a shotgun for them. Like basically someone, you got him to, cut it like an inch or however much below the amount you're allowed to cut off your shotgun. And then there was kind of the deal of like, hey, we want you to rat out your buddies or, make some information for us of usable. And he was like, no, fuck you. And then I guess, and if I remember correctly, the whole impetus for them coming up there was they missed a court date for this. And I believe, you may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is they changed the date and didn't notify him. So I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure that's the case, though. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that story is correct. Where they lived, jobs were not plentiful. So he was having a hard time making a living, providing for his family. The feds knew that he was hard up for money. And so they sent this guy in to buy a shotgun off of him. And the guy kept saying that, I'll buy it from you for this much, but you need to cut the barrel down. And he kept saying, no. He kept refusing. And the guy and one of the things he said was, if you want to cut the barrel, just buy the shotgun and cut it yourself. And he's like, no, I want you to do it. And finally, because he's so hard up for money, he agrees to it. And yeah, it was, I don't even think it was an inch, it was, because I believe it was already like a really short barrel, like double barrel, maybe like a coach gun, something like that. But anyways, he ended up getting a bench warrant put on him. He missed, I believe it was a couple different court dates, and they were mailing him notifications. And I think the last one had the wrong date on it, but regardless, I think, I can't remember if he admitted that he wouldn't have gone anyway. Like, he didn't show up for anything prior. So there is the argument that, like, yeah, they had the wrong court date on what they mailed him, but at the same time, he wasn't showing up anyways. I don't know.
That reminds me of the famous anarchist that got they accused him, I believe, of the Haywood Square or something like that bombing. I forget his name. I'll kick my butt later because it's a very famous name. But he said that couldn't have been me that bombed. I was at home making bombs. So it's kind of the same vibe, a little bit different. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I missed it, but I wouldn't have gone anyways.
Right.
Gotta respect it. But I mean, still the point stands. I mean, if you didn't give him the correct date, you didn't give him the correct date. But
Right.
you know. Haymarket, Lewis Ling. That's who it is. I don't know. I'm like ashamed I couldn't remember that, but yeah, that's who that was. But yeah, all right. Now we're on Waco, which I mean, there's a lot of people have covered that extensively. We won't. I mean, well, you can cover as much as you want, but we definitely won't beat that one to death.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot to that story,
Mhm.
and but there was the siege on Waco, which that started out with a UPS driver of all things, delivered a box, and the bottom of it fell out. Hand grenades were on the floor. So he reported it. That opened the investigation, but it also seemed like the ATF wanted to investigate the Branch Davidians anyway. And what they really were after, or at least what came out during the investigation, was it like a subcommittee, or maybe it was like a grand jury afterwards? They kept bringing up the whole like underage girls and polygamy and all, but at the same time it was legal in the state of Texas. Like the age of the girls that Koresh was involved with were of legal age as long as he had the parents' consent, which he did because they're in a cult. So
Definitely scummy, but you know, it was legal, and I guess there were
right.
other accusations of even like actual underage, but nothing was shown to be substantial. That was just a post facto rationalization, a post hoc rationalization by the powers that be, definitely. But
Yeah, the ATF has absolutely no jurisdiction when it comes to any of that. So that being a justification for going in and shooting up the place, just it didn't work. Um, but yeah, and I actually know a guy who works for one of the companies that Koresh bought his firearms through, and Koresh purposely made sure that everything that he was doing was legal. So everything that was in his possession at Waco was by the book, and he made sure of that as he was buying everything.
I'm pretty sure even those grenades, I vaguely remember those were like kind of those like I've only been to like a couple gun shows, so I don't even recollect it. But apparently, it's a common thing at gun shows where they kind of have like gag grenades kind of deals. So they weren't even real grenades in that way, if I recall correctly. So, but yeah,
Yeah, they were props. They would make their own like tactical vests that the Branch Davidians would sell at gun shows and stuff for extra money, and they would put these grenades on them as props to show like, hey, you know, they can even hold this. Not that anybody can legally own them in the United States, but yeah. So Waco, that ended up. There was the fire, which from what I've seen, that was started by the ATF and the FBI when they did the final raid on the place. They set the building on fire. The tear gas that they pumped into the building, that's flammable as well. So they were just adding more fuel to it with the tanks that they were using. And yeah, so there was a lot of pissed off people about that too. And afterwards, of course, we have the Oklahoma City bombing, which you've got a very long, extensive series on that. So I guess we could sum it up as like Timothy McVeigh, maybe. I mean, but
the way I put it is, it at the very least was a cover up in which the feds didn't give a shit about human life, and probably most likely was a fed off. So like,
yeah,
I mean, I won't say for certain because it is kind of like I haven't seen anything that's like bulletproof that they did it, and maybe I mean that you could explain it as like, I don't know, maybe they didn't have full control of their informants or whatever, or someone had a different idea at some level. But yeah, it doesn't look good. But I'll let you go on.
yeah. Well, with Oklahoma City, there's a couple of lectures by Michael Rupert that I've been listening to lately. And when he talks about 9/11, and I'm going to tie this into Oklahoma City, but people are asking him, like, well, why, if the government was involved, why would they do it? And he would say, like, oh, oil. And they're like, oh, but it's not just oil. It was also this, and it was also this. And Oklahoma City, I believe, was not just one thing. It was to do several things. And so if you look at the motive behind an event like that or 9/11, people want the simple one answer, like, oh, well, 9/11 was all about oil. We wanted to go into Iraq, we had to justify it. But it wasn't just about that. It was also about drug money. It was about a whole lot of other things. The putting the Patriot Act in, which I believe was one of the people who penned that was Joe Biden. Um, but then Oklahoma City, same thing. You had all the papers that the Clintons had in the building. Uh, you had the gun laws that Biden again was trying to pass beforehand, but didn't get approved until after the bombing. Uh, there were definitely several things that were happening that the federal government wanted. They wanted something in order to push these things through, and they got it. Um, but with Oklahoma City, the thing with that is, I remember living in Michigan. Uh, the Michigan militia came up quite a bit afterwards, and it was because allegedly Terry Nichols' brother, I believe, had the farm in northern Michigan, and they were trying to say that some of the fertilizer that they got for making the bomb was through that farm. And then there was the tie-in with the Michigan militia, which McVeigh, he had some loose ties, but it was really to nothing in Michigan. It was Oklahoma-based militia groups that he had some affiliation with, enough to where an ATF informant was able to, like, meet him and Terry Nichols, and then go to the ATF and say, like, hey, these guys have this plan. They're saying they want to do this stuff. You should really keep an eye on them. And of course, it ends up happening anyways. So that was kind of like the downfall of the whole white supremacist militia movement, even though, like, nobody claimed McVeigh. Like, nobody wanted anything to do with that guy.
Yeah, that is that was one of the things me and Richard Booth in our series tackled pretty early on. Like, he definitely was trying to become parts of groups, and it seemed every group was like, get the fuck out of here, we don't want anything to do with you. And because, for one, most of these people see someone like, hey, I don't like the blacks and I want to commit violence, and most militias are like, pretty much distinctly like, well, this guy either glows or he is a issue, so we don't want him either way. So because militias are typically smarter than that, because there's a rich history of feds or even idiots getting involved that get them to cause problems. If you look at the Michigan one, God, what was his name? Adam Fox. I don't think he was. I mean, he definitely wasn't a glowy, but he, even like, it was one of those things like, whether you're glowy or not, the results are the same, because he ended up being a guy that could pin all this shit on and kind of like sort of concoct some nonsense out of. So McVeigh was kind of a joke and a scapegoat and a way for them to continually try to pin the militia movement with the white supremacist moniker. But sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
So after Oklahoma City, you really didn't see anything from the militias after that point. And then 9/11 happens. And what militias were still out there, they really, like, converted their ideas to this whole, like, we're here to protect the homeland from these Muslim terrorists that are trying to destroy what we stand for, and or they hate our freedom. I don't. If you want to sum it up in very, very simple terms, they looked at themselves as, like, we're here to protect our country from that outside threat. Whereas beforehand, they're totally focused on the federal government. But I guess in their eyes, they're like, hey, the federal government's finally focusing on something that we don't like too. So um, during that time, during the Iraq War, like the Bush years, really, they really changed their focus on who they were, who their enemies were. But then I would have to say that the main shift after that point was like Obama. You had Obama, you had the Wall Street crash where the economy just went to crap. They didn't know who this new guy was that was in the White House. They didn't understand a lot of the stuff that he was doing. Uh, he definitely came across as like anti-gun, but then I talked to militia members today and they're like, we liked Obama more than we liked Trump. And it
Yeah.
was
Well,
that was
it's not so much Trump as the fact that when you have a liberal in office or a Democrat, it tends to be harder for them to get shit through, if that makes sense. So when you have someone like a Trump or somebody that people perceive as being pro-gun, whenever they push through gun stuff, then they get less pushback. But yeah,
right. Yeah. And so when Obama came in the office, you had he was almost like the glue that solidified the militias back together. And you ended up with the start of the 3%ers. Uh, you had the Boogaloo came out around that time, although some of the people I talked to say that it really started earlier on the internet, but then like the final form that we see today with the Hawaiian shirts, uh, that that was more like towards the middle of Obama's 8 years. Um, the I wouldn't. I really don't want to say that the Proud Boys are a militia. They just seem to be more of like some type of. I want to say that they're more of just like some type of group that hangs out. You know,
yeah.
I haven't really seen any of them armed. I mean, they do go out, they do get in the drunken brawls sometimes. There's those videos that you can find on YouTube where they're getting in fist fights, and regardless of who started it, the Proud Boys are the ones to blame for some reason. But then, yeah, so you've got quite a few different groups out there. The one, this wasn't in the book either, but the one thing I was really surprised about was the state of Missouri. Like if you really have an interest in being in a militia, the state of Missouri has in their state constitution that I believe it's between the ages of 18 to 36, any man in the state is considered part of the militia, and that's not considered the National Guard. Like they expect their citizens in the state to train and be fit and be part of this group, and it is organized. They do have like the president of the Missouri State Militia. Um, they do have subgroups where like they'll be part of that, but then they're also 3%ers or they're part of the Boogaloo. Um, it just depends on the individual or where they live and what they're interested in. But I did find that to be very interesting because the state itself in their constitution actually protects the people who are engaged in this. And it doesn't matter what subgroup they are, as long as they're not breaking the law, they're expected to actually be in a militia, whether it's the one that they put together themselves or the statewide that's outside the National Guard. And it's not even run by the state, it's run by the citizens.
Which was the original idea of the founders. So, which is kind of interesting. I didn't know that, but go on.
So yeah, with Obama, you ended up having these groups coming out, and the other solidifying factor was probably the Bundy Ranch standoff, which Tim Pool recently had Eamon Bundy on, and the after show, which is available open to the public on podcast. Eamon Bundy goes into like what happened at the ranch, and it turns out the Bundy family themselves weren't armed. They were protesting out with signs and the groups just like anybody else. They didn't even know that the militias had shown up. There's that famous photo of the guy in the bridge with the rifle, the sniper rifle that's aiming it at the feds, allegedly. Um, but yeah, apparently Eamon and the rest of the Bundy family didn't even know that the militias were there. And the interesting thing about that was the fact that the presence of the militias being willing to throw down with federal agents made not only the agents leave, but they returned the cattle that they had taken. It didn't, unfortunately, it didn't bring back the cattle that they euthanized and then put into a mass grave before that, which I didn't find out about that until listening to the podcast, but that was something that happened. So, and the feds haven't been back since. That was the other really interesting factor was the fact that not only did they have this standoff and nobody fired a shot on either side, but the feds left, they backed off, and they never came back.
Yeah,
So
which is
that,
a great demonstration of why the powers that be are scared of militias. And as a result, this kind of ties into the whole Duncan Lemp conversation. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to throw that in there. Go on.
well, I think it ties into like the Boogaloo movement where they were going to these different protests and they were showing up, and then the cops would back off and leave the protesters alone. When I was talking to the guy in my book, Boog, I purposely left out a couple different names. I didn't want to out anybody or put any certain people in danger per se for things that they said or who they are. But Boog, he was talking about how in San Francisco there was like some gay pride rally or protest or something that was going on over there, and the Boogaloo showed up because the last time that they tried having something like this, the cops would show up in riot gear and harass all these people out in the streets who are uh, per, engaging in their First Amendment rights. And the Boogaloo are just like, no, like we may not even agree with what they're doing or saying, but we know that they have the right to do this, and we're going to prevent you from messing with people. And it kind of fits in with the Bundy Ranch. Like anytime, from what I saw, the Boogaloo showed up and were standing around just minding their own business. Like the cops kind of did the same thing. Um, and that kind of also ties into this. I believe it was the state of Virginia that had that ban on the. They had a law where if you're protesting, you couldn't be armed at the same time. Um, but that was, I guess, the government likes you to. Uh, they like you to use your rights the way that they want you to use them. Is how I would put it. And if they can't tell you no at any point that they choose, they have an issue with that. Um, and apparently in 2020, they had no issues with anything that people were doing back then because nothing was really enforced at the time.
Yeah.
So
The common line, I think, is that I believe that at some point the Supreme Court has made some decision along the line of that no right is absolute and that there can be restrictions put upon them. And it's like, well, then that's not even a fucking right. But okay, like that's not a right. But okay, but go on.
Yeah, that I would totally agree with that. Where George Carlin said something about like, we don't have rights, we have privileges because they seem to be able to just take them away at any time that they want. And a right, you're not supposed to be able to do that. And he goes further into like the whole God thing or whatever. But and he's completely correct on what he says when it comes to that, because the moment that they start infringing on any of that, and as we've seen with the recent DHS leaks that just came out, yesterday or the day before,
Yeah.
where they were colluding with all these and we knew this was like I was saying that this was happening a long time ago, and we knew some of what was happening with the Edward Snowden leaks. And then, they're admitting to some things after that, but this whole thing where they had their own portal into Facebook where they could just write in and say, like, we want these people removed, and boom, like they're gone. That's not when they were trying to argue, like, well, they're a private company and they can do what they want. That's not a private company. That's
Yes.
definitely somebody colluding with you, the people who are not supposed to be infringing on other people's rights. There's a reason why that paper was written the way that it was.
Yeah. Well, all right. I feel like we've covered most of the history of the different militias. I saw someone in there asking, "How's this tie in?" I think we already addressed this. I mean, this is going to be. I know it was a Duncan Lemp thing, but this is a. We're going on different little. I'm tailoring this series to kind of like newer people that aren't as familiar with all this stuff. So I'm trying to provide context, do a deep dig on all this stuff. Just want to give the Duncan Lemp story the attention it deserves. But I also do think this stuff is important to know if you're not someone familiar with all this stuff, the context is important. Like why? Because if you don't know any about this stuff and you're like, hey, this guy was killed, and some of the stuff people say about the Duncan Lemp stuff may sound crazy unless you realize the context of the situation of like, hey, this has been a long-standing thing where they don't really like it when people really try to get the militias organized. Or efficient in any way, shape, or form. And this was a guy that was good with tech and really had a love of guns and militias and rights and freedom. And voila, he's dead. So, I don't know. Maybe it could be just an innocent thing to where the cops fucked up hardcore and, ta-da, he's dead. But, or there could be more to it. So, it's kind of like open to your own imagination. We covered all that. I did want to re-emphasize, and you did a little bit, the whole Obama era. He really was pushing hardcore for domestic terrorism, but it didn't really seem to work. I know the powers that be it didn't seem to really go through as well as he would have liked it to, because that was a kind of sort of priority of his administration. And then it seems to be coming full force now. It was almost like Trump was the perfect impetus they needed to be able to push it through. And it's kind of funny they still push this white supremacist stuff and to kind of give it this. And this is why I keep bringing it up, because there's always this like subcontext to anytime you bring up militias of racism. And they may not always explicitly say it. They may kind of like contextually just like make little hints and cues. But there's always this little underlying thing of like racism. And it's like, because you're not supposed to like racism. And don't get me wrong, I don't like racism either. I'm not like as offended by it as some people are. But, it's almost like this dog whistle thing to where they like say racism and expect you to instinctually just knee slap. Be like, nope, I don't like it. Even if it's not true, you just take their word for it. And with that, I think let's start digging into the Boog Boys. Someone just brought Black Panthers. Yeah, no, I actually really like the Black Panthers in some ways. I know don't get me wrong, there's probably instances where you could probably bring up of like, hey, that wasn't cool. But I really, like the blacks, some of them were black supremacists. I really don't even have necessarily that much of a problem with it. I'm not a fan of it. But I'm all for people, organizing and with their Second Amendment rights or their natural rights to own guns and keeping people from fucking with them. I was fine with the Black Panthers. But let's get into the Boog Boys and what they are, what they're about. You brought up 2020 as their heyday. I was actually more involved with them in like the 2016-ish range personally. But yeah, they're an interesting conundrum, the Boog Boys, especially with the racism connotation, because that is one that just like they always tried to stick with them, but it just doesn't stick. And it's this thing where like in modern day with militias, they try to keep using this racism card, but it's such a tired trope that it just doesn't stick today. Don't get me wrong, maybe normies it does stick for, but like I don't know, just most people I feel like are like, what? Like where's this racism you're talking about? But let's talk about the Boog Boys, who they are, what they're about. and the floor is yours.
All right. So the Boogaloo Boys, they're kind of like in a way there's the way that they started is similar to, I would say, the Proud Boys, where it was almost like a joke or a gag. It was an online thing, like a running meme, and then it ended up forming its own ideology, its own philosophy, uh, where they have this thing about the electric boogaloo, and that's why they wear the Hawaiian shirts as part of their uniform. But they believe uh, that there's going to be a time where the federal government is going to step too far, and they're the boog. It's kind of like, in their eyes, Armageddon. It's the end. It's the when the country is going to fall apart, and it's going to start this civil war. And they believe that it's going to start with gun grabs, and which is why they're really hardcore when it comes to owning their guns, training with them. They believe in defending themselves. And this is why Duncan Lemp ended up becoming a huge symbol for the group in 2020, is because what happened to him is exactly what every member of the Boogaloo is afraid of happening, where our men show up, they want to take your guns, and they're willing to kill you in order to do it. So that is where Duncan ended up becoming a huge symbol for them. Uh, but the boog itself, and this is where Wikipedia gets it wrong, where uh, other outlets, different news organizations, but especially if you look at the Wikipedia listing, it will say that they believe in this coming civil war and that they're willing to start it themselves. And it's like, no, like and this is a common thread with the Boogaloo and the Three Percenters and other groups very, very similar to them, is that they don't believe in throwing the first punch. They don't want to start the Civil War. They are there to react when it starts.
Yeah, there
Um,
isn't. I do want to interject. There is a common running thread because I was when I always like tentatively sort of say I was involved around 2016 ish. Although like you said, it's a meme. So like I wasn't like I was ever like a lettered member or like blooded in or whatever the hell the terms are. Like I was just some dude who enjoyed the memes and I was in some groups where we kind of talked about these ideas and like there is an ongoing joke about who's going to start the boog. But even then, it's the idea is to start the boog is in response to government violence. It's not like someone's like, hey, I'm just going to go out. I mean, I guess maybe there were some crazies that would be like, I'm just going to go out and start, often, law enforcement officers or something, like, but for the most part, it was like, hey, if they did something, I'm going to return force and this will kick off the boog. And there were a few situations that like a lot of people were like, oh my God, we almost kicked off the boog there. And so I do want to just emphasize the idea is that this would only be, and this is a common thread, like you said, with the Three Percenters. This was like, I remember reading your little bit in there about the Three Percenters. It was only in response. It wasn't like we're just going to go out and be offensive because I know that's not going to work. It's not going to work to your advantage if you act offensively. But come on.
yeah, there's definitely an idea of holding the moral high ground, to react to a situation but not create the situation. That was an important part of the Boogaloo. And they definitely emphasize training. That was a big part of it. The Three Percenters are the same way. Um, and I found it interesting that, for one, Duncan was a member of both. The one member of the Boog who I was able to talk to, he was saying that it's common for people from the Three Percenters to find the boog afterwards, or vice versa, where they start in one and then they kind of go into another, or they remain members of both. But I was also asking how somebody is definitely a member of the boog, and they would say, well, they're devoted to the ideology. And they were saying that it's very hard to fake. I don't know. I wasn't really convinced of that. I kind of like the way that the 3%ers, how it's very localized. It's like you and your neighbors. Perhaps if somebody on the outside is brought in, it's through relations or previous relationship somewhere. But anybody outside your actual small group, like you just don't trust because you don't know them. There isn't like a membership card that's handed out, and the Boogaloo is the same way. And I think that might be one of the reasons why organizations like the Boogaloo has a difficult time with Glowies going in, is that yes, it's not centralized. They're not really supposed to have any leaders, although certain people like on Vice, Mike Dunn was kind of labeled as a leader of a Boogaloo chapter. And that's not to say that they won't pick somebody to lead them, but in the philosophy, it's supposed to be like every person is trained in a certain way and able to work together or stand on their own. But yeah, that's let's see here. Trying to think if there's anything else with the Boogaloo that kind of stood out to me.
If not, we can move on to 3%ers. I think what's interesting is the comparing and contrasting the 3%ers between the Boogaloo boys. But I mean, unless you have something to add, we can move on to who the 3%ers are and what they're about.
Yeah. Okay. So the 3%ers was started. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. It was started by a guy named Mike Vanderboe. And he was affiliated with militia groups from the 70s, 80s into the 90s until Oklahoma City happened. And then that kind of just like killed everything after that point. And then he reemerges in the early 2000s and he creates this idea of the 3%ers. And I believe it was the early aughts, the teens, before he died. I believe he died in like 2014 or 2015, but he had a series of posts and it was very, very based on history. And he was looking at situations like Ruby Ridge and Waco and saying like, we need to make sure that stuff like this never happens again, which is why you ended up with like the Bundy Ranch happening. Because at Waco, you had people showing up, but you didn't have anybody engaging with the feds. It was very Branch Davidians versus the ATF and the FBI. Nobody on the outside was really getting involved in that. But as for like the Bundy Ranch, it was, these militias came in and they were standing not just with the Bundys, but they were standing on their own against the feds. And that was where the 3% idea kind of came in. Like, we're not going to allow this crap to happen anymore. But he was also very big on like, we don't do Oklahoma cities. Like, this is not a thing. There's no encouragement to do this, no loss of innocence. Keep the moral high ground. Like, this stuff isn't going to happen. Definitely not encouraging any acts of terrorism. But there also was a sense of like, the whole idea of this being a Christian nation. That was in some of his writings, and he tries to base a lot of that on history as well, where he's quoting some of the founding fathers, different things that they said about the country. So you kind of have that, I wouldn't say white supremacist, but you definitely had like a Christian backing to it. Which I did not find anything like that with the Boogaloo Boys. That was definitely a whole other philosophy outside of that. But yeah, so a lot of foundation in history, religion, looking at events that took place and making sure that stuff like that didn't happen again, or learning from those experiences, which I think was probably like the most impressive part for me. Like, I just feel like nobody really learns from history anymore. Like, things happen, 2 days later, we forget about it. But this guy was looking back at different things and just saying like, nope, nope, like we can't forget that this stuff happened. We need to look at how we can prevent this from happening in the future. And one of his philosophies or parts of like training for 3%ers was like sharpshooters and snipers. Um, that was what he really emphasized with that. Um, he did encourage people working in teams, but at the same time, he was saying that like everyone should be a competent marksman and be able to shoot long range. There's definitely the whole idea of like the long march or the rucksack. That was a part of 3%ers, which a lot of this really fits into like rural culture, rural environments. And I think that's why you see a lot of that outside of the city, the 3%ers. You don't really see too much of it in the cities, but you do see more boog from what I've seen.
Yeah. I do want to bring up. I liked the historical example. I don't remember the specific. I believe it was a Civil War example. The 3%er guy used of the idea of not firing the first shot and keeping the moral high ground. I wish I could remember the specifics of it, but there was a maybe you recall it. But there was a specific Civil War example you used that had the Confederates like not fire the first shot. That it would have maybe forced. It basically wouldn't have given Lincoln a perceived high ground and allowed them to essentially, come out the victors, or at least give them the high ground in that situation. I remember the
Yeah,
specifics. Maybe you did. By the way, here in this channel, I'm pro secession for the Confederacy. That doesn't mean I'm pro slavery. I'm just saying I'm pro secession. If they wanted to break off, they should have been able to. That's their own prerogative. That's the way the whole union works. But go check out Lysander Spooner for further context if you'd like. I don't know if you recall that specific example. If not, it would be fun to go into comparing and contrasting the two.
yeah, that was Fort Sumter.
Okay.
Yeah, when the feds came in and they're going to reclaim their fort on Confederate land, and they're like, "No, this is our land. We built the fort. We get to keep it." And the Confederacy was like, "No, screw you." But yeah, the argument was that when the Confederates fired the first cannon at the ships trying to reclaim the fort, that they lost the high ground. They should have just let the North fire first, and then it could be claimed in self-defense. And I don't know. I personally, for me, when it comes to a fight, it's usually the person who throws the first punch is the one who ends up winning the fight, statistically, and from my own experience. But I can see the whole idea of like don't fire the first shot, but it only takes one bullet to kill you at the same time, and that's just me talking. I understand their ideas and like why they would want to have that, but at the same time, I don't want to be a freaking martyr either. So,
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking one-on-one, yes, I agree with you. But when you're talking about a larger, like, geopolitical thing, especially when, most wars become wars of ideals, whether it's, originally intended that way or not, that's what ends up being. The moral high ground is extremely important, I think, in those,
mm-hmm.
in some sort of large, things like that. But let's compare and contrast the two, because I actually think in a lot of ways, the Boog has a upper hand in being a decentralized type thing. Because you brought up feds, we talked about racism, and I don't know specifically so far as racism with the 3%ers, but I know with feds, I feel like the 3%ers are far more rife with feds than the Boog is. Because for one, a Fed, if you're going to try to take over some sort of Boog, it's like, oh, what are you going to take over? There's not like these established, like you brought up, they have leaders, quote unquote leaders, but they're more just like people who rise in prominence. They're not really like actual leaders. They're just people that have gotten popular, I guess somewhat to their own merit. But feds and even racists in the Boog movement tend to be kind of relegated off to the corner. Like, yeah, we're all gonna make fun of you, and I guess technically you can say you're part of the boog because it's not an established thing. But it's like we're all just gonna tease you, and no one's gonna really want to interact with you. Whereas something like an established thing, like a 3%er, it may be more easy to infiltrate in that way. Especially modern days, the 3%ers are rife with feds, unfortunately, because I do think they're, after looking into their ideology coming from up top, it's not too bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have some minor notes here and there that I might disagree with, but for the most part, pretty on point. The whole Christian thing, whatever. I don't really care. I'm an atheist, but whatever. I don't really care. I'm fine with being if I was in a Christian nationalist nation, as long as they weren't trying to string me up for being an atheist, I don't care. I get along with those people just fine. I guess I'd like to get your thoughts on kind of differences between the two. Essentially, kind of like, is there something to being more decentralized? You think there's positives to being more centralized?
Yeah. With the 3%ers, they try to be decentralized, but I think overall I think it's just human nature. There's going to end up being like some leader to the group, right? And regardless of how local it is. It could just be you and your neighbors, and like there's just one guy that's going to stand out in the group. And then there's going to be that one person who's like, hey, I got this buddy that, he wants to come and hang out with us. And it turns out the buddy is a glowy. So I think, yeah, there's definitely issues with the structure of the 3%ers. And I don't know how exactly they could change that. But then there's also, I'm trying to remember the name of the group. They're being their leaders being charged right now, federal court for January 6th. Their lawyer was just arrested as well. It's some reason Patriot Front is Oath Keepers. Oath Keepers, and this is outside of the other two groups, but they're definitely very organized and central. But then the Wisconsin chapter, come to find out, the person leading that is a federal agent. The FBI created the Facebook group for the Oath Keepers for that chapter in Wisconsin. So there's definitely an issue when it comes to being organized. There's definitely a lot of issues, especially if you're using things like the internet to try to organize yourselves in these groups. It just makes things a heck of a lot easier for Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the ATF. Anybody can go into these Facebook groups, pretend to be somebody, and then this person shows up and like, oh yeah, I was in that chat room over there. And, oh yeah, you're cool. And then next thing you know, you've got like half the room filled with federal agents or informants. But as for the 3%ers, yeah, it's definitely easier to infiltrate. With the way that they're organized, even though they try to be decentralized, it just because of how it's structured, it's still easy for feds to get in there. As long as you kiss up to the right person, they'll bring you in. And you can start training with them. As for the Boogaloo, yeah, it's definitely, if you show up somewhere and nobody knows who you are and you're encouraging certain things that don't fit with the ideology, yeah, they're not going to talk to you. They're going to tell you to F off. And it's I would say it's harder. It's definitely it's more difficult for them to try to frame somebody who's an alleged leader in the group. Because there was one situation with Mike Dunn where he was with one of the guys in his militia, and this guy was trying to encourage him that, I believe it was like blow up a hospital or something stupid like that. And Dunn actually turned him into the feds. Because he was like, hey, this guy's saying, he's trying to talk me into doing this thing, and I don't want any part of it. And then after that, the media is labeling him as a federal informant because he turned in one of his own guys. But here he is doing the right thing. He's protecting the group. He's trying to show that the Boogaloo don't do this type of thing. And they just throw it right back in his face, like, oh, look at him. He's a traitor to his own people. And it's like, no, that guy was not part of the group. He was not living by the ideology. He was trying to do something counterproductive. He wasn't protecting the group or the nation, or it's like trying to start the boog is not the job of the Boogaloo. It's reacting to it when it happens. And so yeah, even by turning in his own guy, he was living up to the philosophy of the Boogaloo Boys, and they tried to turn that around and discredit him for it. But being decentralized has its benefits, but at the same time, it also kind of leaves every individual to their own. I guess not being able to. It makes it more difficult to stand as a group, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I don't know. It is kind of hard to compare the two because, I mean, I would personally lean on the side of centralization, but it is an interesting conversation to be had either way. But speaking of feds, let's talk about Patriot Front, and then we'll wrap it up. And then next episode, I promise, will be a little bit more Duncan Lemp heavy. But I just really, I do think this is important context for people to understand if they're trying to understand the Duncan Lemp story from a larger context.
So Patriot Front was a group that magically appeared after January 6th. All of a sudden there's Facebook groups, there's all these chat rooms. People are being invited, encouraged to join Patriot Front. We're going to protest in DC. We don't like how things are going. And they're trying to get all these people to show up. Nobody had heard of this group. Nobody was familiar with it. They didn't know who created it, who the leadership was. And I remember specifically before this rally happened, Glenn Beck, of all people, is like, hey, they're encouraging people to go. If you're not familiar with Patriot Front, don't worry, nobody else is. So you had Glenn Beck telling people, don't go to this rally. Every militia, every group was saying, do not go to this, regardless of how cool you'll think it is. It's definitely not going to be January 6th. You're not going to change anything. And lo and behold, the people who did show up were reporters and guys who are definitely feds. And the story that we got from the reporters was that you had these guys wearing sunglasses, fitted t-shirts. They're not adhering to like any of the normal militia gear or anything like that. They're definitely dressed like off-duty police officers. They all had the same haircut, clean shave. It was completely ridiculous, and I'm trying to remember the exact quote I had in the book, but it turned into a BDSM orgy of handcuffs and safe words as these guys are going around trying to arrest each other, and it's like, you're under arrest. I'm FBI. I'm ATF. No, you're not. Look at my wallet. It's like, and so you end up having these guys that are getting cuffed for saying or doing stupid stuff at this rally, and then they're putting them in the back of a car, and then they ID them and they let them back out, and then that guy's going off to try to arrest somebody, and it's just this repeating thing. Thankfully, as far as I know, whoever did show up that wasn't a Fed didn't do anything stupid. But yeah, it was basically a big non-event. It was in my opinion, a complete embarrassment because you had all these different agencies going in trying to find people to arrest in order to make a big scene about how like we can't stop these people, these guys keep showing up to protest and look at what they did at January 6th. And it's like, yeah, and nobody, as far as I can tell, nobody showed up. It was just a complete joke, and it was basically trying to entrap people to come in and do something stupid so that they can make the arrest and they can get the story. And it's just the usual crap that goes on with stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, they're still going on to this day, and they've had multiple different situations. But I mean, really, if you're someone who doesn't look at that and think there's something fishy going on here, I don't know. You're just, I guess an NPC is the best way to put, or you're just not thinking deeply about this stuff because it's so fishy, it's to a ridiculous level. The Patriot Front. I do think it's important though to bring up this context. You know, when we're going to go into Duncan Lemp, the idea of the contention between the two, how ridiculous the Fed involvement is. Yeah, but with that, I guess if you want to go ahead and drop your plugs, we'll get out of here. And, like I said, next episode, we'll get more into the Duncan Lemp story. But I do think it is important to understand, the context of the militias and how they interact with the powers that be. And you also got to think of it in a larger context of where we are as a nation. We have completely exhausted ourselves out externally so far as, overseas, the Middle East, whatever. And now we're at a point where things are getting wild with the dollar, economically. We're getting to a point where, they're going to start turning that power inward because they have really overexhausted their abilities as a empire. And now I think they're a little bit worried about the powers that be rising up. And I'm not calling for a rise up. Let me be clear. I actually am one who has criticized things like Boog or a revolution. I don't think those generally work out to your benefit, but that is something the establishment is very much scared of, and I think that is important to understand. And this is a reason why this has been a priority for decades now, because they've always been worried at some point they're going to fuck up, and that's going to, like I said, I think with a revolution you're likely just to put a new establishment that's going to be just as bad if not worse in the end. But the people in power don't want another establishment put in because that won't be them. So so they are scared. So I do think that's an important thing to realize. So, but if you go and drop your plugs, we'll get out of here, and I'll let you go on with your day.
Well, I think the last thing I want to say is if you really want to understand the Duncan Lemp situation and what happened, look at the very recent DHS leaks that came out, and the fact that the Department of Homeland Security wants to have the sole authority over the internet. They want to control everything. They want to control Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They want to monitor everything. They want to control who's on there, who's saying what. They want to know every conversation, every post. And not only that, but they also want to control as to who's out there, who you're seeing. You can be subscribed to somebody on any platform, and they can just shut it off. All of a sudden, you're no longer seeing that person. Like there's several people on YouTube that I follow. I don't see their stuff anymore. But if you really want to know like what Duncan Lemp, that whole situation was all about, look at those recent leaks and look at the actual documents. You can download the actual documents that they used for that story on The Intercept and see for yourself as to the different things that they were doing. And this is all 2020 afterwards. This doesn't cover the stuff that they were doing beforehand. And they're already saying that this is the biggest story probably of our lifetime. But you look at the things happening before 2020 and what DHS was involved in before then, and I think that's the real story right there, is the things that they were getting away with, things that were leaked but nobody really gave a crap or knew about because we're too busy hating Donald Trump. That's there were definitely things that came out that DHS was doing, and now we're learning about what they were doing in the last 2.5 years. But beforehand, all that stuff was ignored and forgotten about. But you put the two of them together, and yeah, it's not the local terrorist that you have to worry about. That's the villain. It's somebody with definitely darker ambitions that are trying to run everything from behind the scenes, and that's what it all boils down to.
Yeah, and this will all come into view even more when we start getting into the kind of things Duncan was seems to be he was trying to pull off so far as technologically of why they'd be like, oh shit, especially in context of the DHS stuff, the internet, which is like kind of been the greatest tool for free people, but on the flip side, it's also the greatest tool for the power elite. But it's a arms race, and luckily, with decentralization or free people, they're a centralized unit that only works, generally kind of works in a one-track mind. So hopefully we'll win overall, but it is definitely a dicey territory. But yeah, if you can go drop your plugs, we'll get the hell out of here.
All right. So you can find me at thecollapseexperiment.com. I also have a podcast called The Collapse Experiment, which I really haven't been keeping up with lately. Although I do have to have a update post because my last story that I had on there has some revelations that happened today. You can also, if you want to get in touch with me, the collapse experiment at gmail.com. And yeah, all my books are available on Amazon in ebook and paperback format.
In this specific book, you want to plug that real quick?
Crash in the Night, The Assassination of Duncan Lemp.
Yep. And I'll be sure to get the links from you. So whenever this goes public, roughly a week from now of the live stream, I will have those in the links so that way you can go to the video description and you can order it. Buy a bunch of them, send them around to your friends, whatever, what have you. Definitely a story I think needs to be spread. I'm glad it's finally getting its due, in a book form. Hopefully that'll move it around in a different medium. But I appreciate you for that. This is the No Way Jose Show. You can find me on YouTube, all the major auto podcatchers, Odyssey as well. If you want to follow me on Twitter, at SenorJose2020. Hopefully Elon finally starts pulling back the old accounts and I can bring my multiple other bigger accounts I've had before. That'd be nice. But you can also follow me on Facebook if you want, Jose Galison. I'm on Instagram now too. I kind of a boomer in the technological sense, so I'm still kind of figuring out Instagram. I don't really like it. But, I'll stick around there just for an outlet. If that's where you prefer, you can get a hold of me there. I don't remember what my name is, but Jose Galison or something along those lines, you probably can find me. But yeah, if you want to support me, patreon.com, No Way Jose 2020. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And with that, we are out. Appreciate your time, Matthew. We'll do this again in like a week or two. And, keep on keeping on. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.